Yeah. Can I buy it from you?
Yes, absolutely.
I really enjoyed it. It was $5? Okay. That's so neat. I was looking when it got published. Is this recent? Did you recently?
It's new and selected.
Oh, that's
It's the
cute.
best of
Do you have a friend who did it?
Yeah, his name's Christopher Treon, and he's a mad genius. Very good.
Very good. And I really enjoyed your poetry. I'm going to keep reading it. I'll have to find you some time to get a CD. I'm just running low on cash right now.
I can show you.
Yeah, I saw it. No, I'll have to find you because I'm always around.
Six, 60 minutes worth of good selection. Goes for 10 though.
But I have $5 more. So
Oh, that's very sweet.
Well, I take checks, and you could probably have one set for 7 if you're broke, but I know what you mean.
People coming down the stairs. My God.
Thank you for coming. Just a couple of short things. This is an ongoing series, so if you look online at Moe's.com, we do lots of readings of lots of poetry, lots of political stuff. If you haven't come to our series before, please look and stop by. Another thing, in 2 days, I believe Thursday, 50 years ago, Howl and Other Poems was cleared of obscenity charges. Lawrence Ferlinghetti and City Lights has been leading us for a long time. Lawrence's most recent book, Poetry as Insurgent Art. It's a message to poets, but I think there's a wider message to readers of poetry. And it's stay interested, stay engaged, and stay on top of things. And even if you don't write poetry, this is a very important book and one to pick up. Please welcome him to Berkeley, Lawrence Ferlinghetti.
Greetings. I was glad to see that bridge was still there. So I could get in from the Republic of San Francisco, that offshore republic. Well, this is a prose book, Poetry as Insurgent Art, and it's also directed to graphic artists. Poets and graphic artists. How's that? That's better? I'm just going to read the first part. Poetry as Insurgent Art. It has a couple of 2 or 3 quotations in the front. First one by, well, it's after Bertolt Brecht. What times are these when to write a poem about love is almost a crime because it contains so many silences about so many horrors. Another quote. We apologize for the inconvenience, but this is a revolution. Subcomandante Marcos. I am signaling you through the flames. Maybe some of you recognize that stele. It's from the French dramatist Antonin Artaud. I am signaling you through the flames The North Pole is not where it used to be. Manifest destiny is no longer manifest. Civilization self-destructs. Nemesis, the goddess Nemesis, is knocking at the door. What are poets for in such an age? What is the use of poetry? If you would be a poet, create works capable of answering the challenge of apocalyptic times, even if this means sounding apocalyptic. If you would be a poet, write living newspapers. Be a reporter from outer space, filing dispatches to some supreme managing editor who believes in full disclosure and has a low tolerance for bullshit. Have wide-angle vision. Each look, a world glance, express the vast clarity of the outside world, the sun that sees us all, the moon that strews its shadows on us, quiet garden ponds, willows where the hidden thrush sings, dust falling over the river run, and the great spaces that open out upon the sea, high tide and the heron's call, and the people, yes, all around the earth, speaking babbled tongues. Give voice to them all. You must decide if bird cries are cries of ecstasy or cries of despair, by which you will know if you are a tragic or a lyric poet. I'm skipping through this. In first light, wax poetic. In the night, wax tragic. Express, pardon me, conceive of love beyond sex. Strive to change the world in such a way that there's no further need to be a dissident. I was on Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! On Labor Day, and I read part of this. I read that phrase, and I said, Amy, can you imagine having changed the world to the point that you had no longer need to be a dissident? This program no longer need to be a dissident. She didn't answer, you know, she never answers. She just asks the next question. She's totally unflappable. Read between the lives and write between the lines. Say the unsayable. Make the invisible visible. Think subjectively, write objectively. Think long thoughts in short sentences. After a poetry reading, never submit to a question and answer session. Poetry gets the listeners high. A Q&A brings it all down to prose. Do they ask a folk singer to explain his songs? Like a field of sunflowers, a poem should not have to be explained. Challenge capitalism masquerading as democracy. Poetry is seeds and buds, not twigs. Smoke it to get high. Secretly liberate any being you see in a cage. Stand up for the stupid and crazy. sound of barbarous yawp over the roofs of the world. Caw the great caw. Sow your poems with the salt of the earth. Express the inexpressible. See eternity, not the other night, but tonight. Be a canary in a coal mine. A dead canary is not just an ornithological problem. Be a wolf in the sheepfold of silence. Don't pander, especially not to audiences, readers, editors, or publishers. Don't cater to the middle mind of America, nor to consumer society. Be a poet, not a huckster. Stash your cell phone and be here now. Don't fiddle with your mustache in hopeless cellars, writing incomprehensible dribble. Why live in the shadows? Get yourself a seat in the sunboat. If you have nothing to say, don't say it. Dare to be a non-violent, poetic guerrilla, an anti-hero. Raise the blinds, throw open your shuttered windows, raise the roof, unscrew the locks from the doors, but don't throw away the screws. Don't destroy the world unless you have something better to replace it. If you would snatch fame from the flames, where is your burning bow? Where are your arrows of desire? Where are your wit on fire? When the poet lets down his pants, his ars poetica should be evident, giving rise to lyric erections. The master class starts wars. The lower classes fight them. Governments lie. The voice of the government is often not the voice of the people. Speak up, act out. Silence is complicity. Be the gadfly of the state and also its firefly. Wake up, the world's on fire. Have a nice day. The next section is a development of an earlier book called What is Poetry? As I said, this is still an ongoing project, this book. What is poetry? Love, lie with me, and I will tell. Poetry is what we would cry out upon coming to ourselves in a dark wood in the middle of the journey of our life. Poems are burning bows. Poems are arrows of desire. Poetry gives words to the heart. Poetry is the truth that reveals all lies, the face without mascara. What is poetry? Wind stirs the grasses, howls in the passes. Voice lost in dreaming, door floated over the horizon. Oh, drunk flute, oh, golden mouth, kiss, kiss in stone boudoirs. What is poetry? A clown laughs, a clown weeps, dropping his mask. First light and a dark bird wings away. It's a poem. There are three kinds of poetry. Supine poetry accepts the status quo. Sitting poetry, written by the sitting establishment, has a bottom line dictated by its day job. Standing poetry is the poetry of commitment, sometimes great, sometimes dreadful. The idea of poetry as an arm of class war disturbs the sleep of those who do not wish to be disturbed in their pursuit of happiness. The poet, by definition, is the bearer of eros and love and freedom, and thus the natural-born, non-violent enemy of the state. It is the ultimate resistance. The poet, a subversive barbarian at the city gates, non-violently challenging the toxic status quo. Dissident poetry is not un-American. It is the voice within the voice of the turtle. It is the face behind the face of the race. It is the voice of the fourth person singular. Poetry, the last lighthouse in rising seas. I won't bore you with all 87 pages. The last part is a section called Forethoughts. And I'll just it's 3 pages. I guess it won't take long. Modern poetry is prose. This was written in 1978. I am thumbing. It's still true, I think. I am thumbing through a great anthology of contemporary poetry, and it would seem that, quote, the voice that is great within us, unquote, sounds within us mostly in a prose voice, albeit in the topography of poetry, which is not to say it is prosaic or has no depths, which is not to say it is dead or dying or not lovely or not beautiful or not well written or not witty and brave. It is very much alive, very well written, lovely, lively prose. Prose that stands without the crutches of punctuation. Prose whose syntax is so clear it can be written all over the page, in open forms and open fields, and still be very clear, very dear prose. And in the topography of poetry, the poetic and the prosaic intellect masquerade in each other's clothes. Walking through our prose buildings in the 21st century or later, one may look back and wonder at this strange age which allowed poetry to walk in prose rhythms and still call itself poetry. Modern poetry is prose because it sounds as subdued as any city man or woman whose life force is submerged in urban life. Modern poetry is prose because it doesn't have much duende. Dark spirit of earth and blood, no soul of dark song, no passion music. Like modern sculpture, it loves the concrete. Like minimal art, it minimizes emotion in favor of understated irony and implied intensity. As such, it is the perfect poetry for a technocratic man. But how often does this poetry rise above the mean sea level of his sparkling plain? Ezra Pound once decanted his opinion that only in times of decadence does poetry separate itself from music. And this is the way the world ends, not with a song, but a whimper. 80 or 90 years ago, when all the machines began to hum, almost, as it seemed, in unison, the speech of man certainly began to be affected by the absolute staccato of machines, and city poetry certainly echoed it. Whitman was a holdover, singing the song of himself, and Sandberg, a holdover, singing his sagas, and Rachel Lindsay, a holdover, drumming his chants. And later there was Wallace Stevens with his harmonious, fictive music. And there was Langston Hughes and Allen Ginsberg chanting his mantras, singing Blake. There still are others everywhere, jazz poets and rappers and poetic drummers and wailers in the streets of the world, making poetry out of the urgent, insurgent now, of the immediate, instant self, the incarnate, carnal self, as D.H. Lawrence called it. But much poetry is still caught up in the computers or the linotypes, hot slug, a bit dated. And now in the computers, so-called type. No song among the typists, no song in our concrete architecture, our concrete music. And the nightingales may still be singing near the convent of the Sacred Heart, but we can hardly hear them to the cry to the city, in the city wastelands. Nor in the prose wastes of Ezra Pound's cantos, which aren't canty because they couldn't possibly be sung, etc. I find this a bit dated in spots. All of which is applauded by poetry professors and poetry reviewers in all the best places, none of whom will commit the original sin of saying some poet's poetry is prose in the topography of poetry, just as the poet's friends will never tell him, just as the poet's editors will never say it. The dumbest conspiracy of silence in the history of letters. While some continue longing for some nightingale among the pines of Respighi, it is the birds singing that makes us happy. Pretty good excerpt of the book in general. Now I'd like to hear some of your reactions and retorts or questions about the book. What do you think? I'm not looking for praise.
Yes, I mostly didn't keep up with you from the time of Coney Island of the Mind, and then I picked up this. I mean, I got Coney Island of the Mind like maybe my 12th copy that I got in my life recently. But when I got this, I got about halfway through before you showed up. I got here at 6 o'clock because I'm smart. But it was like, what I see is like, it reminds me of the aphorisms of Patanjali. It's like they're lovely little bits that are maybe interrelated, but they can be taken out and thought about as little thought things.
You're talking about what's in this book.
In this book. This book emphasizes, and it's lovely.
That's a good way to interpret it, among other ways.
That's what I did for now, this evening, when I got it. One back there.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell you that I noticed that what I liked about in your work, that especially in this book and your other work, how you talk about unscrew the screws but don't throw them away from the door, things like the cages and the birds, that whole thing, how you keep things together and let them go is really nice because it's seamless.
What? Thank you. I should say at the beginning, starting out with, I'm signaling you through the flames. What's the crisis? Well, I'm talking about the crises in ecology, the ecological crises of the world, and secondly, the crises of the warfare state, as Solomon puts it. And that's the justification for coming on like that at the beginning. And another thing is, you notice several places I mentioned that it's nonviolent protest. Which is, I'll avoid the government committees that way. No, but as far as nonviolence goes, you know the old question, could Gandhi have stopped Hitler? Well, Hitler was too smart to have a direct confrontation. He would have marched around Gandhi through another country. But that's avoiding the question, really. From the Platonic point of view, nonviolence is a concept that you can kill Gandhi, but you can't kill the ideal of nonviolence. Trying to pump prime the, yeah.
There was one point where you talked about making the invisible visible, or the unseen seen. Is that, can you explain that a little bit? Are you talking about the spiritual realm that we lack in our society? Or?
You know, this is not, this wasn't a book of poetry, so it's all right to have a question and answer session after. To explain that phrase is a little like trying to explain a bowl of rose leaves in a way.
I'm just new to poetry, so.
Yeah.
You talked about modern poetry not having soul, not having dark. I'm just getting old enough to appreciate the dark, but I don't know anything about it. Is it another bowl of rose leaves? Did you talk about the dark and the soul?
Bowl of thorns, maybe.
Talk about the what?
The dark? The soul that's dark.
Well, I mentioned duende in one of the poems, which comes from Lorca. And duende, in relation to flamenco, evidently someone can be a wonderful performer, but if he doesn't have duende, which is the dark soul of existence, the dark voice of the canto honda, which is, I mean, there's so much darkness in the world, we can't deny it. Well, I was at I heard Mahler's song cycle the other night at the San Francisco Symphony. Talk about darkness. I think Mahler must have been a manic depressive for sure. And
You look at Rembrandt, he's got 90% black and 5% light. And there's feel.
The other 5%.
And there's feel. I don't know.
A mathematician.
Feeling comes out of the dark.
yeah, that's true. But then there's W.J. Turner, who is 5% dark and 95% light. So you need one to survive. You need the light to survive the darkness. Oh, well, that's an eternal image. Yeah.
On how to paint sunlight, your first poem.
I couldn't hear you.
How to paint sunlight, at your book, How to Paint
Oh,
Sunlight.
yeah.
The first poem is a kind of instruction to would-be poets about